Hey, it's Code Ninja here. This video I wanted to show off one of the new features of the Battlefield 1 game from the December 2016 patch, and that is the ability to do, well, cinematics really with the Spectator mode. It allows you to get into any server that you want pretty much and choose the Join as Spectator option through the server browser and server info here. And once you get in there and go through all the typical load process and everything, it pretty much gives you free control over the camera. You're not actually playing as a character, but you have control over the camera through three different modes: through tabletop mode, which is kind of the default that you start in here, through first person mode or player mode, I guess, and then also through free camera mode where you can really just move the camera around all you want. Now this is me kind of experimenting, figuring out how this actually works, and it's a little rough here at the beginning. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. I'm slowly figuring out that I can zoom in and zoom out using L2 and R2, and I can switch around selecting different players in this tabletop mode using the right analog stick, and then moving around in the camera with the left analog stick as well. So at first I'm just trying to kind of get a hint of what's going on. You'll see various hints come up on the screen every now and then. You'll see on the screen that there is an options button that gives you pretty good control over things with camera sensitivity and filters and all kinds of different things that you can play with to turn information on and off on the screen. And other things like that. Overall, I really enjoy this spectator mode. You can do some really cool stuff with creating some real cinematic feels out of this, with movie-like quality, following people around and getting into first-person view and going back to third-person view and having the camera follow them around and being able to switch back and forth. And so as you see, as I'm going through this, I'm slowly starting to figure out how the movement actually works, using the left analog stick to move things around, using the L2 and R2 buttons. When you're in free camera mode, L2 and R2 will basically go down and up. It's the vertical movement instead of zooming forward and backwards. You can control where the camera looks by using the right analog stick while you're moving with the left analog stick. And once you kind of get a feel for that, you'll start to be able to do some pretty cool effects here, some pretty cool camera movement. You can see, I mean, it's not the most easy thing in the world to do. It is a little bit choppy, a little bit rough at times, especially when you don't quite have that muscle memory for moving the cameras around. But overall, the experience, once you get used to the controls, is pretty good. And you'll see as I'm going through this experiment here that, eventually I do start to get pretty good at controlling the camera, and I start to figure out really what's going on and start to do some interesting panning and sweeping and following characters around as they're playing the game. You'll also notice, though, that when this game first started up, there's quite a bit of information on the screen here, and it gets kind of annoying. So if you go into the display options and choose that Show Border Bars, you can hide that. So it's going to get rid of a lot of the information on screen and give you more of the classic standard Battlefield 1 UI that you would expect from when you're actually playing the game. Now, there are other options that allow you to hide all of this information. You can see that hint on screen. If you hold down square on the PS4, it'll hide everything. But you can also choose to hide or show individual parts of the screen. And we'll show a little bit more of those options later on, hiding this for more of a real cinematic effect. But for now, I just want to experiment with the camera a little bit and kind of get a feel for moving around in this free camera mode, see if I can follow some action as it's happening and follow some characters around, choose a few different camera angles, sweeping around and watching the battle unfold as it's actually happening live on this particular server. So let's sit back and watch for a few minutes here.
We are losing Objective Edward.
And at this point, the game is just about ending, and I am pulling the camera out so I can get to the end of the game. You are going to have to go through all the standard loading screens between rounds, which gets kind of obnoxious, but you can go through and edit that. Now let's take a look at some of the player cameras instead of the third-person free-roam cameras that I was doing previously. So I'm going to go through the options here real quick, just kind of play with things a little bit and see if there's anything that can help me get out of this first-person mode. When I was first trying this, wasn't quite sure how to get out of the first-person view that I was currently in, so I was trying these different options. Turns out that you just need to click down on the R analog stick, so R3 is the official button name for that. Once you click down on that, you'll go into this third-person mode where it's a fixed camera, and then if you click it again, you'll end up in a free-form camera on that particular player. So you can control where the camera is, what it's looking at, while still following this player around. And the camera, the person player-based camera, is pretty interesting. You can do some pretty cool stuff. You see I switched over to somebody riding a motorcycle at this point, and I am in free movement mode with the player at this point. I'm watching them, but I'm positioning the camera. I'm zooming in, zooming out. But the game is actually pretty intelligent, the way it handles moving into buildings, and it does that little cut right there to get us inside so that we can see what's going on. Of course, the player died at this point, but we can choose another character. You can switch back and forth between characters really easily by pressing L1 and R1. Here I switched back out to tabletop view, selected another character, and then immediately went into the game right where they are and started watching what they were doing. Click R3 again, get back into first-person view, and play the game as they are playing it for a few moments. I see they're going to get into an armored vehicle here, so let's follow that armored vehicle around for a little bit and see what this particular person does, and maybe get some more cinematic shots out of this once we get into the way this player is playing the game. But here you can see I've held down the square button so that I've gotten rid of all of the UI. You're only seeing the game at this point. And this is where you can really get some good cinematic views in the game from this spectator mode. You can do some really cool stuff, getting rid of the UI entirely. Just follow the character around, follow the player, put it in free camera mode. Whatever you want to do, you can get some pretty good shots, and you'll see some pretty good cinematics, some real, movie-like options for moving the camera around. And the game itself, like I said, is doing a lot of the positioning of the camera. I'm really just moving the camera around, making sure that I'm getting a good angle on the player as they're playing, but the camera itself is, or the game itself is centering on the player that I have selected at this point. So let's again take a moment here and just run through some fun cinematics before moving on to the next segment. Oh, and one other thing you notice right there that I did pull up the score. You can still hold down the options button and you'll be able to see the score. The highlighted yellowish, orangish line is the player that you're currently watching if you have a player camera enabled. So you'll be able to see the current score of whoever that player is, as well as the rest of the team. And that's just the standard options button that you hold down on the PS4 to get that view. So moving on again, I wanted to try out the filters. I know there's some pretty cool filters in here. There's things like sepia tone and noir and tilt shift, and my personal favorite is the saturated filter. It just makes all of the colors pop really bright and nice and crisp. It makes the game look quite a bit better, I think, honestly. Now, I know the game is supposed to have that real gritty, kind of grungy, less saturated look and feel to it, but frankly, for me, this saturated mode makes the whole thing look quite a bit nicer. I really like the way this saturated mode looks. So I'm going to play with this for a little bit, follow a few people around, around, try to get some good cinematic shots, and just generally have fun figuring out how this camera control system works, trying to really get a feel for moving things around, following the action, etc. All right, now this was a little bit tricky here. What I tried to do was zoom down into the player and get them selected. It didn't quite work out the way I wanted. You see there was a pretty obvious cut right there in the edits. But what I was really trying to do was go for that, top-down view, then zooming down to where they are to get into that first-person perspective on the player directly. Haven't quite figured out how to really make that work from the free camera mode. I couldn't figure out how to directly switch into the player that I was looking at. So I had to go through player view and then select through the characters and through the players in order to find that person. And it was a little rough there. I think I could have done that better, but I still haven't quite figured that part out yet. Moving on again, though, I found at the end of this match that there was a behemoth coming on the train, and I wanted to get some good shots of the train in action. I thought it would be really cool to have some cinematic pans and scans and follow the action surrounding the train, get a couple of flybys here, and even trace a few people that are trying to take down the train. And then towards the end of the train segment here, it's going to get pretty foggy, which was kind of unfortunate, but also kind of interesting. It was quite difficult to follow the train through the fog and really see what was going on. So I did cut most of that out. But that, again, just shows you the real power of the game itself and the spectator mode, how it actually gets you really in the game and all of the weather and all of the environment, everything that's going on. But let's just take a couple of minutes here and watch through the train and the cinematics that I was able to get with this, following this guy around as he's attacking the train. And then once we get through the train and get into the fog, that's really going to be about it for this video.
We are losing objective Charlie.
So here you can see the fog is really starting to roll in, and we're about to close this up for now because we're not really going to be able to see much else. But I hope you've enjoyed this video, a quick look at my experiment with the cinematic mode for really the spectator mode for Battlefield 1 that they added. And if you like this video, be sure to give me a like, give me a subscribe, drop some comments below, let me know what you think of my basic camera movements, and I'll see you in the next one.